you are essentially perpetuating a false idea of what schools do. There has been zero conversation about disability, zero conversation about how do you engage children with autism, learning difficulties, and ADHD in the learning platforms. There's zero conversation, therefore there's zero experimentation, and we have virtually no knowledge. How could we have a policy that in the flash of 4 hours effectively make 100 to 200 million people go hungry the very next day? The correct word is physical distancing, not social distancing. We must never socially distance, ever. Uncertainty is the biggest stressor on the human brain. Not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing what's around the corner, creates a huge amount of anxiety. People like Deepika Padukone had made enormous contributions in disclosing their own personal stories, etc. It's important for people of your generation to demand a more responsible media. I think those images of the migrant workers working, I will never ever forget them. It's almost like I lived through a partition.
Yeah. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Into Their Minds. Into Their Minds was started as an idea to build a platform to have active discussions with few eminent personalities. And in this season, we're more focused towards getting to our audience, few eminent personalities, and sharing their perspectives about the current pandemic situation. Likewise, previously we had two eminent researchers sharing their perspectives about the COVID pandemic. And today we have yet another eminent personality, Dr. Vikram Patel, with us to share his perspective about the current pandemic situation. So Dr. Vikram Patel is a psychiatrist, professor of international mental health at Harvard Medical School, and a Wellcome Trust senior clinical research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's the co-founder of Sangat, an Indian NGO researching in the areas of child development, adolescent health, and mental health. He's also affiliated with the Public Health Foundation of India, and he was listed as one of the 100 most influential people with Time magazine for the year 2015. Dr. Patel, it is my pleasure having you with me today.
Sure, Gokul. Thank you for inviting me. Just a quick correction on my affiliation. My affiliation is only with Harvard Medical School, where I'm a professor of global health, and with Sangat, which is where I work mostly in India. My other affiliations are honorary.
I see. All right, sir. Dr. Patel, the first national lockdown went into effect in the late March. At that time, you were raising concerns about the consequences of such an out-of-the-blue lockdown on the physical and mental health of the society. 6 months have passed since then, and people have been in quarantine. Some children are going back to schools. People have lost their jobs. The economy has shrunk. What toll do you think the pandemic has had on the public mental health and well-being, and what kind of long-term effects could we be expecting?
Well, one can only do predictions, right? Because there is still very little actual on-the-ground information coming in. For example, we still don't really know, as many other countries have been able to document, is the total number of people who have died in the last 6 months, both due to COVID-specific reasons as well as due to other reasons. And we know very well that the other reasons could include suicides. There have been hundreds of suicides, for example, documented in the media, but no official data on suicides. We don't know, for example, the number of people who've died because routine healthcare for their existing medical problems was disrupted. Now we can begin to see in other countries where documentation is much better than India, that actually the lockdowns have led to so many more deaths due to, for example, the fact that women could no longer get to hospital to deliver their babies. For example, a paper just published from Nepal has found that the number of newborn babies who have died in Nepal after the lockdown was 4 times higher than the period before the lockdown. So I think the real true toll of the epidemic, both in terms of the virus itself as well as the lockdowns to control the virus, has yet to be told. But my prediction is that it's going to be enormous, that it is going to be far greater than the number of deaths that are currently being reported that are due to COVID-19.
I see. And following that, a large body of your work has been devoted to child mental health. Do you think the lack of social interaction with peers over such an extended period of time could hamper their psychological and social development?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to remember a couple of things, Gokul. The first is that, this idea that schools are only places to learn is a rubbish. And so, it's absurd. Actually, schools are places where in India, for example, a huge number of children actually get their daily meal. The poorest children in India rely on their midday meal for their main caloric intake of the day. Secondly, of course, schools are also places where children, in fact, shape their social personalities, and development is more than just learning geography, history, and science. It is also about learning how you relate with one another. And so when you shut down a school and shift all the school work to just learning online, you are essentially perpetuating a false idea of what schools do. The second important piece to remember is that the large majority of our children do not have access to digital technologies in their own homes. They either don't have their own devices or they live in homes where there's no internet. And so it is an absurdity in a country like India to assume that the whole country can just overnight switch to Zoom. And I think there's a third piece which I should also highlight, which is that the burden of schooling has essentially been taken over or basically displaced to mothers, because fathers don't do much in our country when it comes to the welfare of children. And so mothers who now have to also continue their regular work are having to do domestic work as well as look after their kids. I mean, I think we've done this without even a consideration of the enormous implications for young children and their families.
We were just talking about online learning. So, Dr. Patil, in this new normal, everybody is trying to adapt to online learning, which is quite different from the normal conventional modes. So, however, there are some students who already live with certain psychological conditions like ADHD or depression, which would make the online learning experience even worse. So, what would you suggest to make online learning more accessible for such students?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Gokul, and it just reflects, again, our complete lack of justice in our planning. Justice and equity in a country like ours, where we have such vast numbers of poor people and such huge inequalities that existed even before the pandemic, this entire shift to digital learning has only worsened it. Not only have we not considered the needs of children in families that don't have access to the internet, by definition, poorer, rural, remote communities, but secondly, there has been zero conversation about disability. Zero conversation about how do you engage children with autism, learning difficulties, and ADHD in the learning platforms. There's zero conversation, therefore there's zero experimentation, and we have virtually no knowledge. My preliminary anecdotal understanding is most of these kids are not learning at all at the moment, because they just simply cannot engage with Zoom platforms. Children with intellectual difficulties, for example, you have to have very special kinds of learning offerings delivered on the internet to make it engaging and accessible to children with different needs. And we're nowhere near that yet.
I think, considering what you said, I think this could be yet another example of how the pandemic has worsened some issues which were never truly addressed in the first place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Inequality is one of India's greatest concerns, to be quite honest. And in the last 6 months, we can already see that the few people in this country who are already unimaginably wealthy have actually grown even wealthier, whereas the rest of the country has only grown poorer. And so you can see that this pandemic has pulled India even further apart because of the increase in inequality.
True. And are there any resources that are available to those who are actually struggling with such difficulties?
Well, in the West, yes, but they're all in English. So again, this is it just makes you think about how short-sighted some of our policies are.
Sure.
That we don't think of the weak, the vulnerable, the marginalized. For example, when the lockdown was announced, it's absolutely true that I think it's hard to predict where the virus was going, and of course we were totally wrong right through everything. We've been wrong. Yeah. But even then, I mean, I'd say that at least a part of me would agree that actually, the government had to do something, and I can understand the need for a lockdown in the absence of real knowledge. But one thing we did know, without a shred of any doubt, is the number of people in India who are daily wage laborers. Why? Because every year there's a national survey of the economy that tells you that. That means we knew that when you had a lockdown, how many people would stop earning the very next day. So you have to just pause for a moment and think, knowing that,
Sure.
How could we have a policy that in the flash of 4 hours effectively make 100 to 200 million people go hungry the very next day? And I think that is what I feel most sad about.
Dr. Patel, misinformation. Today, a few experts believe that one of the major problems is to deal with the amount of misinformation being spread. In a way of speaking, misinformation is spreading more rapidly than the virus itself. So how important is it to regulate our exposure to continuous stream of alarming messages and misinformation about the spread of COVID-19, the number of deaths and so on?
So first of all, let's be clear about this. Misinformation is not the result of COVID-19. Misinformation has been around for 5 or 10 years. I don't know how many of your viewers have watched the documentary Social Dilemma recently. We now know that misinformation is a product of these kinds of completely opaque algorithms and the commercial interests of the big social media companies. And so I think we should be absolutely clear that all that has happened with COVID-19 is the established platforms and mechanisms through which elections have been undermined, hate has been created, violence has been perpetrated, is actually now being used for COVID-19 misinformation. So as a society, the question to us isn't so much at the moment about just the COVID-19 misinformation, is how do we control the transmission of fake news, hate and violence by the social media platforms? Are we willing and able to take the necessary steps to protect our country and our democracy from this kind of hateful stuff? That said, with COVID-19, what I would urge all your listeners to be thinking about is to only rely on reliable sources like the WHO for your information about, for example, how to protect yourself. And if you have COVID-19, what to do about it. Do not rely on our private doctors alone because they will throw every single medication in the book to you. Instead, look at this very helpful guidance that the World Health Organization every day actually revises, and it is based on the best science. And that is the most reliable source. Everything else, you just delete.
Okay. So I would like to talk about how this pandemic situation is affecting interpersonal relationships. So in the beginning, some people looked at this as an opportunity to spend some time with their loved ones, but the narrative soon shifted towards how the social distancing and self-isolation was deteriorating personal and professional relationships. So what are a few things that could help someone cope better with and maintain these connections?
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, I think it's worked in different ways for different people, Gokul. Those of us who've been lucky to have our families together with us, it's been actually, for me, for example, it's been a real pleasure to have my family with me together in my home in Goa for like 6 months. It was an unanticipated treat. But obviously, I think that is not the case for everyone. Some people have found themselves separated during this lockdown period and hard to actually communicate. The other thing, of course, is for older people, because of the anxieties about their well-being, and it's a absolutely appropriate anxiety. Obviously, the need to keep a distance from them has often meant that people don't meet. So the point I really want to make here is the word social distancing is a wrong word. The correct word is physical distancing, not social distancing. You know, we must never socially distance, ever, because we are social animals. But physical distancing is required. Physical distancing means you don't hug somebody, you don't go very close to the person. When you're close to somebody and you are potentially at risk because you've traveled outside, you actually always wear a well-fitting mask, etc. You know all the guidelines. You know, this is a public knowledge now. So if you do that, I think you can retain contact, particularly with your elderly relatives and also with your friends, without endangering your own health and, most importantly, endangering the health of vulnerable people.
I mean, following that, I would like to know if there are any indicators that a person could notice when he's developing some sort of psychological condition. Because most of the symptoms that are associated with psychological conditions are almost found in everybody to some extent. But the intensity of it is what really defines a psychological condition. So when should you think a person should be reaching out to a professional help with respect to the symptoms?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Gokul. And first of all, let me start by saying you're absolutely right. The reaction of our brain and our mind to the sorts of stressors that we're currently facing, particularly the uncertainty. Uncertainty is the biggest stressor on the human brain. Not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing what's around the corner, creates a huge amount of anxiety. And this is evolutionary, by the way, because evolution has equipped us with skills to protect ourselves, because survival is the whole goal of evolution. And so anxiety and fear are ultimately things that arouse us and actually make us alert and aware of our surroundings to react quickly. So this is all evolutionary. But in these extraordinary circumstances, this uncertainty, as it becomes so chronic, it's now been lasted 6 or 7 months and there's no sign of ending, begins to actually create problems in our minds. And I think the most important differentiation between a normal anxiety, a normal reaction to an uncertain situation and mental health problems is three things. Firstly, how long? So I would say, as a rule of thumb, if your distress in terms of not sleeping, feeling irritable, etc., continues for more than 2 weeks. Secondly, how pervasive. That means it's not just one aspect of distress. It's not just that you're feeling worried, but you're also feeling very hopeless. You're not sleeping well. You're losing interest in things, so that it's affecting many different aspects of your mental health. And thirdly, is it interfering with your daily life and there's nothing you can do to actually pull yourself out of it? It's when these three are occurring that I think it's a suggestion, it's an indication that you might be developing a mental health problem. And the first thing to do is not to go to a professional, is to acknowledge it in your mind. Look, I think I'm having a problem, like you do when you have chest pain that's unnatural, and go and speak to someone. And that someone can be a friend, your roommate, your partner, your family member, and it could also be your primary care doctor. But don't assume that you have to immediately rush and find a mental health professional.
Dr. Patel, you mentioned about acknowledging the condition you're going through, right? So a lot of people, specifically in India, are hesitant to seek mental health interventions due to the stigma that surrounds it. So how far has India come in addressing the stigma, and how much more ground do we need to cover more?
So, until the suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput, I would have said my answer to your question would have been, I think we'd made huge progress in the last 2 decades. Overall, until this tragic suicide, I had felt that the media was behaving very responsibly, that in fact it was contributing to reducing stigma, that people like Deepika Padukone had made enormous contributions in disclosing their own personal stories, etc. And I actually thought, I was getting invited to all sorts of places to speak, which is not the same 20 years ago. 20 years ago, as a psychiatrist, no one would have invited me to speak other than in a medical meeting. So I think there was all indications that we were changing our narrative. The tragedy was this. First of all, the real tragedy was Sushant Singh Rajput's suicide. But then the media witch hunt that followed has reduced what was a mental health tragedy into something that is beyond description. It's a vulgar, obscene, playing with someone's tragic death, destroying so many other lives to go with it, reducing his substance use into some kind of moralistic, depiction of his character. And so I believe we've lost many years of progress thanks to this absurd and obscene way that the media has reacted. And I feel very sad about that. It's important for people of your generation to demand a more responsible media, to demand from the media a more responsible way of talking about mental health and suicide than what we have seen in the last couple of months.
So since most of my viewers are researchers, and of course working in academia is quite stressful, stories of burnout and depression among grad students are alarmingly common these days. On top of all that, there is a stress associated with how a researcher could continue with his project in this current pandemic situation. Given the present circumstances, what advice do you have for those students, and how best can they take care of themselves mentally?
Yeah. So when it comes to the actual academic demands, as a professor myself, I put a lot of emphasis on my mentoring relationship with my students, and so I'm hoping very much that the community of students, and especially the community of their teachers, sees the issue of mental health and well-being as a very important part of their responsibility. And so, having a mentoring relationship that not only focuses on research outputs, but also simply starting a conversation by saying, how's the week been? How have you been in the last month, etc., I think would be very helpful. Secondly, peer groups, so that students actually coalesce around peer groups that actually support each other in their work, but also use those peer groups as ways to actually deal with difficulties. And in fact, therefore, you can have a dual purpose to these peer groups, both a kind of professional academic purpose, but also a much more interpersonal support perspective. The third, of course, is all the good things that we as individuals should do to promote our own mental health. For example, being able to acknowledge it, that I talked about earlier, seeking counsel of a friend or a family member when you are distressed by your symptoms, meditating, which I think can be extremely helpful, particularly by cutting out the noise of the world outside. Restricting the amount of time you spend on social media. I think that's terribly important. I want to stress that again. Limiting the amount of time you are spending on the news and social media, and using the spare time to do something outdoors. going out for a walk, or essentially doing physical distancing but socializing with friends, etc. And if none of this works, and you still find, as we discussed earlier, persistent, pervasive, and impairing mental health symptoms, not thinking twice about seeking help. And right now, perhaps the good thing that has come out of this pandemic has been the use of telemedicine becoming the norm. And so you can sit in your dorm or your room and actually access good counselors without actually doing anything more than just clicking on a link. So I think, using telemedicine in an appropriate way, if nothing else works, is a very, very important suggestion as well.
Right. I would like to know about the things that Sangat, your NGO, is currently involved with helping people in the whole COVID situation.
Absolutely. So Sangat's greatest contribution has been the demonstration. It's a pioneering organization. It's really demonstrated that instead of us sitting around thinking we don't have enough resources, which has been the usual narrative, we need mental health specialists and they're very expensive and they're very few and they all sit in private hospitals in the cities. Sangat's real unique contribution has been demonstrating that you can deliver mental health care without mental health specialists. Obviously, there are certain kinds of mental health problems that need specialists, but most don't. And so that means we change our narrative from saying we need more specialist resources to asking the question, how do we use the resources every community has to actually deploy mental health care? And obviously, Sangat has developed very, very scalable digital technologies to train providers to assure quality and so on. And in fact, technology is another very big part of Sangat's innovation. So right now in the COVID-19 pandemic, we're doing a number of things. Obviously, telemedicine and providing telecounseling is one of them, but also developing fast tracking our digital platform called Empower, which is intended to help train what could be millions of frontline workers to learn the brief evidence-based psychological and social interventions that Sangat has designed to prevent mental health problems and also treat conditions like depression.
I mean, that's really wonderful. Looking at rather not complaining about the lack of resources, finding the amount of resources we have and then making use of it. It's a wonderful initiative. I really appreciate that. And that leads me to my final and my favorite question. Are there any important messages or inference about this whole situation that you feel is going unacknowledged or underrepresented in the public discourse?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the pandemic has only brought into sharp relief the structural violence and inequalities of India's people, and I think those images of the migrant workers working home will be forever seared in my mind. I will never ever forget them. It's almost like I lived through a partition-like experience that my parents lived through, and I think that if there's one thing I would tell every young person in India today, that if you want to see a country in which you can feel proud to belong to, that your primary goal must be not just to deal with the symptoms of the problem, for example, the pandemic and what happened, but actually the root cause. And that root cause is structural violence and inequality. And I would really say, see everything in our country through the prism of justice. And by justice, I don't mean the Supreme Court, I mean social justice. And I think if you do that, you'll begin to identify very clearly what the focus of our action should be, because otherwise it can be extremely overwhelming when we see all these different issues. But actually, if we start connecting these issues and realizing that all of them are simply symptoms of a deeper problem, and the deeper problem has a solution, by the way. And there are many countries that have been effectively addressed that deeper problem. And it is for us, the young people of India today, to actually mobilize ourselves in solidarity to try and address that problem. Then you will inherit a country that will actually be one that everyone feels a part of.
Professor Patel, it was a delight talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing with us your perspective about the situation and making my viewers understand a little bit more about the current pandemic situation. I really appreciate you taking awesome time and for making this interview happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gokul, and all the very best to you and your colleagues.
Thank you.